Good evening, everybody. My voice is still a little bit like... Serenity now. I'll get some coffee if you don't mind. Just black. So I think, has it been two weeks since I've been here? Yes. So last Friday, I guess it was, I went to the doctor. I thought, this is it. This is how I meet my demise. After all the weird things I've put in my body over the years and all the dangerous behaviors, I'm going to die of bronchitis in a parking lot in Greenville, South Carolina. But I feel better, not 100%, and my voice sounds a lot worse than I actually feel. So we're going to do this thing tonight. I want to try to get back on track with some of these educational sessions. Is Carol here tonight? I'm going to give Carol a hand for and I appreciate that, and everybody who came. I heard it went okay. I heard it went well. So I don't want it to go too well, though, guys. I mean, I still want to feel like I'm special, so lie to me a little bit. All right, so you guys have been here before, you know how this works. I have my idea or kind of my outline on what I'm going to go through, but you guys are new, so this will be good for you to get a baseline idea. But also, we got to stop and take as much time as we need in any particular subject area, and then you guys make sure that you bring up questions, and we talk about what you want to talk about tonight as well. Does anybody have any outstanding issue or outstanding topic that they want to learn a little bit more about tonight before I get started? Anything going down? Yeah, subuclade or buprenorphine, right? Yeah. So I don't know if you guys could hear. So there's a medication-assisted treatment called buprenorphine that comes in a wide variety of forms. Subuclade is an actual long-lasting injectable form, which I would think would be a preferable form, because why? You don't have to take it every day. You know the dose is going to be there. You know the person's going to have to be administered it. I personally don't know of a lot of different places that are doing that right now. I don't know what the cost is either. It clearly would be in terms of the administration of buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is a medication-assisted. It's a medication that helps a person not go through withdrawals, and it helps a person manage cravings. We support medication-assisted treatment at Favor Greenville. We're okay with it. We don't care how you get better. We just want you to get better. And so this would be an injectable form, which means the person, one of the things you have to worry about is whether or not the person takes it, whether or not they take it the way they're supposed to, whether or not they give it to somebody else, whether or not they sell it to somebody else. If you were getting the injectable, that would obviously take care of a lot of that. So we would recommend it as a real option for folks. Does anybody have any experience with it or anything that they would want to share about that? No. Okay, so Vivitrol is actually an antagonist, which is a blocker. So when you think of opioids and how opioids work, I'm sorry, this phone. Carol, did you do this last week? Did you break this thing? So the way opioids work is they fully bind to the mu receptor, and that's what, if you're taking them for pain, it's much less likely for this to happen, but that's what leads to the euphoria. That's what people like. It produces the high, if you will, because it fully binds to the mu receptor. You guys got that part. So when I use heroin, that's what's happening, and it's bringing me way up. Now, so you can stop using altogether. You can go through detox. You can become abstinent. You can go and you can go to meetings, and you can get well in that route. And we support that route as well. But there's also this route where you get medication. You take it daily, or you get the injection, and what it does is it keeps you from going through physical withdrawal. Does everyone know what physical withdrawal is? Physical withdrawal is when you don't have the substance, you're literally sick. So that's the first thing. It also helps with cravings. And the way it works is the following. Methadone. Show of hands, how many people have heard of methadone? Methadone is considered a full agonist, which means it binds completely to the receptor. but it's released over a longer period of time, and the effect is not as intense as if you take something that's released immediately. Does that make sense? So if I take a Percocet, I'm getting it all, and it's boom, I'm getting high. But if I take methadone, the idea would be that it would be released longer acting, longer half-life, not as much euphoria. But it is a full agonist, okay? Everyone get that? It is an option. Buprenorphine, Subuclade, Subutex, Suboxone, all kinds of different brand names. It basically is a half agonist or a partial agonist. And you can think of it as it binds partially to the receptor. So it also helps with withdrawal, but it has a ceiling effect. You're not going to get high from it, and you also can't overdose from it. You can't overdose from methadone because you can get the full effect. That's the second one. That's buprenorphine. So you got a full agonist, partial agonist, and then an antagonist. That is Vivitrol. That is naltrexone. Naloxone. And what it does is it literally blocks the cell so that it can't get on at all. The downside with Vivitrol is you got to have about 7 days clean, 7 days substance free to start Vivitrol. And so a lot of times it's not even started unless a person's coming out of treatment. Very hard to do that while they're in the community actively using. More often you'll see methadone and buprenorphine. Most often right now you'll see buprenorphine. What questions about that? What other questions? We support it, guys, yes?
So how would your loved one get that medication?
So you go to a doctor. There are several different ways. We have resources listed on our website. There are office-based situations where you can go in. A doctor has a waiver. He's allowed to prescribe it. Some folks go to a clinic. It's harder to find Vivitrol. That's probably the hardest of all three. But you get an appointment, you go in, they take your loved one through it. A lot of these programs, you have accountability around counseling, that kind of thing. The programs that we have, almost all of those, we have vetted in terms of that part of the process. You know, they want you doing other things other than just medication. They would like to see you do groups. They would like to see you stay off of other drugs too, right? It's able to treat the physical side of the opioid use disorder. Do you guys get that? The physical side. If you think about addiction or you think about opioid use disorder, it's biopsychosocial in nature. So there's a biological part, which is what? I get sick when I don't have it. There's a psychological part, which is the cravings, the thinking about it, the coping skills. How do I do life without it? And then the social part, biopsychosocial or spiritual, however you want to think, it's other people and how do I do the world. You guys get that? All of those factors are involved in a comprehensive recovery plan. Now, again, what we believe is we don't care how you're doing it. If you're getting better, we want you to keep doing it. We don't care what you call it. You guys understand it? It is not important to me that you do recovery in a certain way. I don't buy that. I don't believe that. The way I got recovery can be completely different than Barbara. We got to do something, and you got to start working toward your life getting better. If somebody came to me and said, I'm going to do buprenorphine, I'm going to do Subuclade, what else should I do, Rich? I would absolutely recommend you get to groups, you get an individual counselor, that kind of thing, and you stop doing other substances. But again, we would support people no matter what direction they were going. Are you guys clear with that? Because that's real important to us. Yes, sir.
Is it unusual to hear addicts say, I need to go to Adderall as a response to taking Suboxone?
It might be normal, but it's not logical, and it's not legit. That combination makes no sense, to tell you the truth, in any kind of clinical presentation. You got to remember, so you have this, and I'm going to show you guys some of this stuff, but you have these mood or mind-altering chemicals, and some of them are prescribed, and when they're prescribed and when they're taken the right way, they're non-problematic. Can we all agree to that? I'm not here to vilify drugs. I'm not here to vilify prescription drugs. But what I'll tell you is that people will be drawn to the recreational benefits of these substances. And you got to be careful because they'll set it up as part of a story around what they need. I'm going to talk about co-occurring disorders tonight. When I do that, I'm not saying that co-occurring disorders, meaning co-occurring mental health, that it doesn't exist, but what I am telling you, there is a natural kind of pursuit on the part of a person who's entered into substance use disorder severe to change and alter the way they feel via substances. So I can't imagine the circumstance where somebody needs Suboxone and Adderall. Yes?
My son's tried Suboxone on his own. I assume he's taking it orally.
Yes.
I don't know.
Most likely.
And I've heard one of the side effects is increased urge to gamble. Does that make any sense?
I haven't heard that.
You haven't?
Has anyone else heard that?
All right.
So, I mean, look it up. You can easily look it up, and they will. The thing about it is, if it's a side effect, it'll be listed because they put on these warning labels and on these websites for this medication, they'll put anything that's a possibility. So I haven't personally heard it. I could see, though, one of the things, if you think this through, one of the issues that could go down would be impulsivity and other types of risky behaviors and stuff. Because why? You're already sort of pushed in that direction a little bit. Perhaps that's what it is, but I personally haven't heard that. What else? Barbara?
I'm just wondering if you can kind of give a correlation. If I'm sitting in here and I'm not involved in the drugs, but I am involved in the alcohol issues, how do I correlate while I'm sitting here listening to you with the issue I have versus what you're talking about? Because I know they both.
So I think it's a good question and a good way to think about this. One of the things that will happen is folks will kind of separate themselves out and they'll think that this doesn't apply to me, it doesn't make any sense. But if you really just get down to what is a substance use disorder or what is addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or prescription drugs, whatever it may be, it all involves a fundamental brain change, period. And I'm going to talk about that tonight. But with alcohol too, it doesn't mean that there aren't other issues in a person's life. And that's where things get interesting with medication. So we're sitting here talking about Suboxone and Subuclade for opioids, but you could easily be talking about something like anxiety medicine where alcohol is concerned. I've known people who've taken things like Klonopin or Xanax while they've been trying to work through an alcohol use disorder. And the conversation is almost identical related to this issue. It's just not that specific in terms of buprenorphine, Vivitrol. But it's the same idea. It's how do you delineate between what a person needs in terms of medication support, because we know these issues do exist, versus what do they need to do in terms of their recovery. It's one of the trickiest things ever, guys. It's very difficult, and as you can imagine, it gets hard to negotiate with the person who's dealing with this issue, because sometimes, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm about to tell you something. People in addiction aren't necessarily honest all the time. Okay? I wasn't always honest. I am a person in long-term recovery. I'm allowed to say that. I didn't always tell the truth. Did you have a question, New?
No, I was just going to say that, being as you're talking about blockers and things, there is antabuse for alcohol, which will make you sick.
So antabuse falls under a category called aversion therapy. Seriously. And that is, if you drink while you've taken antabuse, you get sick. And so psychologically, you say to yourself, I'm not going to drink anymore. But let's talk about when they say you get sick if you drink when you're on antabuse,
You get sick.
that's like saying the Cleveland Browns aren't a very good football team. Who's a Cleveland Browns fan? I'm sorry.
They're going to be better.
You get your blood pressure.
So what happens is that you get violently ill. Like it's given birth to the devil type throwing up. I mean, I drank on antabuse before, and I thought I was going to die. But it didn't stop me from drinking because all you have to do is not take the antabuse. It's not used nearly as often. There is also, naltrexone is also used. There's a drug called acamprosate, which is used to curb cravings for alcohol sometimes as well. Not nearly as often, but it is there. Acamprosate is the brand name. What other questions about this part of it? Yes?
So my son, I've been coming here 3 years or so, but, so anyway, I think he's done everything there is to do. But anyway, so he had his little time with the Subzol, Suboxone, that kind of thing. And where we are now,
Yeah, but that's your son's experience. So this is what's very important. You can't, that may have been what happened to him, but that doesn't mean that's what would happen here.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that, but I just want people to, for one, you know, one thing too, if your loved one is given that medication and if that's something that they may deal with, you wanna kind of hold on to that medication and give it to them, because they might not be able to, they're gonna.
And that may be one of the reasons why Subuclade is better, because you don't have to deal with anything.
Right.
Here's what I'll tell you.
Mine's just decided he's gonna go abstinent with everything, so he's kind of starting all over again and going with that, so he's in treatment again.
So, which is good news. I'm glad to hear that. So if you think about it though, guys, if you step back and you think about the overall process here, and what are we really trying to tap into? That there's no one right answer. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and no matter what is involved, whether it's medication or abstinence-based treatment, it's going to require some action on the person's part, and it's probably going to be a little bit messy. I'll be honest with you. It's the idea that somebody goes off to treatment or off to rehab and gets dipped into the pool of recovery and comes back and lives happily ever after. That is not how this works. It's just not. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years professionally. I'm in recovery, coming up on 20 years myself. I mean, I've been around the block and I've talked to thousands and thousands of people, and I don't know that I've actually ever met somebody who just got it like that. What is it? It's one step forward, two steps back. It's a screw up here, a screw up there. As people keep, here's the deal. If people keep trying, they tend to get this thing. And if they try one thing one time and it's Suboxone and it didn't work, and they try this the next time, that's even better, right? How many people in here, you don't have to raise your hand, have ever been on a diet and they didn't follow the diet? Well, what the hell? It didn't work, did it? So, and the idea would be, it's not like don't ever go on a diet again. Try it again. The problem where addiction is concerned is what? You get into that brain stuff. So you get into when the person starts using again, they kind of go off the deep end. Maybe you can't even talk to them rationally. Maybe they won't hear you out. But the message would be, get back on the wagon. Get back on the wagon. Get back on the wagon and keep trying, because if you keep trying, you might be going like this, but eventually you're going to get it. Eventually you're going to get it. And that's, for family members, incredibly frustrating. Incredibly frustrating. It's you get your hopes up, you start to feel better about it, you start to feel a little bit optimistic, and then what happens? Boom. You fall off the edge. And that can be heartbreaking. So that's the part where being in groups, I'm going to talk about this tonight, being in groups and trying to stick to your plan and thinking to yourself, here's how I'm going to approach this. And try not to have my day and my mood dependent on what's going on with my loved one's recovery. Because that you're hitching yourself to an unpredictable wagon. And what will happen is, it's interesting, you'll get real caught up in the perfect solution. This has been my observation over the years doing this in all kinds of different settings. I still have a private practice. I don't do it as much, but one of the things that I would do a lot in my private practice were one-time consultations, because I didn't have a lot of time, but I would sit down and I would review records. And what I found was families were looking for that perfect treatment center, or they were looking for that perfect counselor, or they were looking for that perfect group meeting. And the truth is, none of that matters. That's really not going to help that situation. You want to make sure you don't find a group meeting that's horrible. You want to make sure you don't find a treatment center that's horrible. Are you guys following me? But they're all going to be similar. They're all going to have the same general idea behind them. How can we help each other not use? How can we help each other with information? That kind of thing. You can find bad ones, and that's what you want to stay away from. But the idea that there's a perfect solution, you have to be really, really careful with that, because when you find it, and you find out it didn't work, what's it going to be? Holy cow. Because there is no perfect solution, guys. Recovery is a process, not an event. Recovery is done over time, not via any given experience with any given person. I'll give you an example. Me, for example. A lot of people think that if they can get to me, they're going to get some kind of answer. That I have, like, knowledge. Now, I do know more than pretty much everyone else on the planet in this area. And so I get where you're coming from, but I also, at the end of the day, don't necessarily have a new answer. Do you guys get that? Like, a lot of it is, how do you get your loved one, how do you set your life up, How do you do your boundaries? How do you run your life where you're going to continuously like be encouraging recovery and not supporting addiction? And again, here, the other factors, how old they are, how many times they've tried this. But the results are kind of optimistic if you just look at the straight numbers. About 66% of folks, 70% of folks will get this thing if they keep trying. 9 out of 10 folks quit trying. Are we getting that? So let's just, that's where you want to try to be. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through. So this is where we get into what are the fundamental questions that come up around family recovery. And you'll kind of, I want you to think of it as there's like two different columns that you want to work on. One is, what can you do to help your loved one? Or maybe a better way to say it would be, what do you do in reference to your loved one? Because of your loved one. And then the second area is, what do you do for yourself? I know that sounds incredibly simplistic, but that's pretty much the essence of family recovery. Would you guys agree? Is there anything I can do for my loved one? What should I do? What should I not do? How involved should I get? And then the second one is, how do I not lose my mind? And so in terms of what you can do for your loved one, these are just some of the ideas. I used to have this on a chart. I decided just to put it up there because I'm not suggesting these are all the different things that you can do. But in the universe of possibilities, this is the way I see it. You walked in here tonight, you're dealing with a situation. Everybody's situation is probably different. Some of you are here for the first time. You're just becoming aware of this. Some of you may be here, and this might be the 18th time that you've been around this merry-go-round. One of the choices you have is to do nothing different, just continue to gather information. And we will support you in that. We'll listen to you, we'll hear you out. You keep coming to this, you keep getting more and more education. Would everyone agree that that is an option? Yes. Downside to that is that you're still going to be living in the exact same situation you're in. The second thing you could do is maybe there is no one else involved. Maybe you're the only person here, or maybe it's just you and your husband, you and your wife, that kind of thing. And you might say to yourself, I'm not going to do anything with George when I get home, but I'm going to try to find out who else needs to be involved in this conversation. Can you bring anyone else into the mix? Or is there anyone else that has to be in this conversation because they're very close to the person? Remember, you got to get the people that are closest to your loved one. An example would be, mom can have her opinion, but if Rich is married, Rich's wife's opinion might matter too. Does that make sense? So you might want to start with, rather than what do I do with my loved one, how can I get my husband here? How can I get my mother-in-law here? Can anyone relate to that part of it? You also don't want to fight this battle all on your own. You'll get worn out, man. Can you spread the love on this thing? And so here's the other thing that happens here a lot. Well, they won't come in. My husband will not come in. My mother-in-law will not come in. Tell them to look at my Facebook page. Because here's the deal. I'm looking at them right now. You're part of the problem. I'm serious. They are part of the problem. If they won't come in, they're part of the problem. And here's your response to them when they want to give you unsolicited advice. And they want to tell you how to... Shut up! You don't want to have anything to do this. You won't come to the group. You lost your right for feedback in this situation. You guys get that? You don't need to hear from the peanut gallery about how to run how to help your loved one when they don't have the courage to come into this group. And I know that's going down for some of y'all. I hope you guys notice my new, more assertive tone tonight. Right? Yes. No, I mean, I'm thinking about this because I hear it all the time and I see it all the time. You know, a good example would be like mom. Mom is put on the chopping block, and she's the tip of the spear, and she's going to come to this group every week, and she's got to figure this out while dad sits in the background and just tells her how she's doing it wrong. If you're doing that, you are part of the problem. I just like looking at the camera. Yes?
I would also say, especially on Facebook, share that in private message with someone. So, you know, we should watch this and then maybe they'll understand better why we're doing this the way we're doing it.
And, yeah, absolutely. And at certain points, you might have to say to people, I can't talk to you right now. I don't really want your opinion on this matter. We're not going to talk about this. When we're together, if you start talking about what's going on with Susie or you start talking about what's going on with Johnny, I'm changing the subject, and if you continue, I'm leaving. Because if you're not going to be living in the solution, I don't need your opinion. Because... Boom! It's like WWF, WWE. So the deal with that would be, if they came here, they would learn about what? The disease. They would learn about the way that this is going to progress. You guys get where I'm coming from? They would have a leg to stand on them because they would be informed. But if they're not here, or they're not in similar groups, or they're not learning about this, they really don't have any room to stand. There's nothing worse than a person. Not that there's nothing worse. A really bad situation is when somebody out there wants to tell you, if that was my kid, I would. If that was my husband, I would. If that was so-and-so, I would. Because it's just not true. They wouldn't. I know they wouldn't. And they just don't know what they're talking about. And that is just chipping away at your morale. It's chipping away at your stress level. Really, really start to put boundaries up between you and those people as well. But try to get them involved if they need to get involved. Now, let's say maybe you do have people involved, or maybe you've made the decision that they're not going to come around. The next thing you can do is you can start a change plan without the person's consent. And what I mean by that is you can just simply start changing certain things that you do. This is what my wife did. She started to change the way she responded to me. She didn't sit down and say, hey, you need to get your act together. She stopped arguing over things. She started to set boundaries. You guys get that? You can do this. And you might start with small boundaries. You might just start to practice this, or you might start to practice the way you respond during conflictual situations. But you can start to change something about the situation. The fourth one is you can have a planned family meeting. Now, obviously, you need to have other people involved. What do I mean by a planned family meeting? You can call, you can get on with one of our coaches. Many times you don't even need to do that, though, because you kind of know this stuff because you've been coming to this group, where you're going to say to your loved one, hey, Rich, after work today, we want to talk. And you're going to get 3 or 4 of you there, and you're going to sit down and you're going to say, we love you too much to just sit here and act like nothing's going down. We're worried about you. We want you to try to get some help. Would you go over to Favor tomorrow? There's a meeting at noon. Or, if it's more severe, maybe they need to get into a rehab. You would talk through some of that with one of our coaches. The difference between this and an intervention is there's no bottom lines in a family meeting. There are bottom lines in an intervention. You guys know what I mean by bottom lines? No. Bottom lines are, Rich, if you don't go get help, you can no longer live here. This would just be, we care about you, we want you to get help. No ultimatums. That would be the ultimatum. Get that one? The next one is you can detach emotionally from the situation. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do, also one of the most powerful. That is basically, I'm stepping back, I'm not saying anything to anybody, I'm not rolling in an intervention, I'm just simply not bailing this guy out anymore. I got nothing to say about it. I got to turn to, is it hot in here or what?
Yeah. Damn.
I'm like, I thought I was having like another episode. I think I'm going through menopause. So you can detach emotionally. You can also detach physically. Now, sometimes that means, like in cases with spouses, sometimes the spouse will leave. Sometimes parents to children, detaching them physically means you have to leave. The person has to leave. Does that make sense? Yes.
So, how do you detach emotionally, yet still try to communicate that you love them?
A lot of people can't detach emotionally without detaching physically because they can't do the half communication thing.
So say they do both.
I'm not telling you you have to do it that way.
No, I totally get that. I've done both.
Yeah.
So the question is, now that I've done both, is there any way I can still communicate that I love you?
Yes.
So it's a tricky.
Technically, detaching emotionally doesn't mean you don't have contact. It literally means you do not get emotionally caught up in the progress of your loved one.
I think too, this goes back to what you said originally about detach from the crazy bandwagon. They're nuts. You're not having a rational conversation. So by not having a discussion with madness, you emotionally get that.
So it would be something like they go out well, this might be a bad example. Let's pretend you're detaching emotionally from the situation, but you haven't detached physically. The person is still at home, and they're like, I'm going out tonight. I don't care what you say. I'm going out with George, and you know George is a bad dude. Detaching emotionally would be, not my monkey, not my circus. You ever hear that phrase? Like literally, none of my business, whatever. But it would also mean that when he gets arrested later that night, you're not going to the jail and bailing him out. And it has a lot to do with your reaction to the situation. You can't detach emotionally if you're reacting out of anger. You have to almost learn how to be. Anybody ever see the TV show Star Trek with Mr. Spock? Remember how Mr. Spock was rational? And you're almost like you're trying to get like a business relationship, sort of like, I'm not going to go there. And it's very, very difficult because you typically love this person, which is one of the reasons why people will separate completely. Now, I will tell you that I have coached people and counseled people that were able to have conversations just about the weather or the football game. And they would set a boundary that as soon as their son or daughter, you know, or husband or wife went to like, hey, can I get some money? Or when can I move back? They would say, you know, we're done here. I'm going to get going. I'll talk to you again next Wednesday. And there are ways to go about that. One of the most interesting strategies, or one of the things that you could think about doing, would be to try to set up, let's say that the situation is I've detached. I just simply can't watch you do what you're doing. You're in your mid-20s, you're doing your thing, you've got to get out of my house. They get out of your house, and they're still acting up and doing what they're doing out there in the world, and you know they are. And you're not bailing them out of jail. You're not paying the rent. You're not doing any of that. But you still, you know, they're still your son, they're still your daughter, you want to check in on them. You set up a lunch, man, I'm telling you, but you set it up on a regular basis so that you don't have to negotiate it all the time. And it's like every Wednesday I'll meet you for lunch at such and such. And you go every Wednesday. And occasionally he shows and occasionally he doesn't. And you never bitch when he's not there. You follow me? You don't ever text him. You don't ever do any of that. But when you're there, you just try, and you focus on that, and you get better and better and better at just, hey, I love you. Let me know when you need help. That's all I'm going to say. Now, and that's the other thing. At the end of every one of those, you should have some tagline. You guys get that? Hey, I love you. It was good to see you. Let me know if you ever need help. I just want you to know that I got to go. I'll see you next Wednesday. Sometimes if you get into a routine like that, you can manage it. But I know a lot of people who say, I can't do it like this because I wind up like this. Anybody else have any experience with that they would want to share? Yes?
We did it just by telling her we would always take her to a meeting, and I would buy her lunch. If she didn't have here for a meeting, I would take her out for lunch.
You had a clear like association there. You hear people use the slogan or the phrase, I will support you in your recovery, I will not support you in your addiction. That would be supporting her in her recovery. If she'd have called you up and said, can you give me a ride over to my boyfriend's house, and you know the boyfriend uses, you would have said no. You guys see that? You try to keep it as simple as you possibly can. I don't know if I'm missing anything else, but those are kind of what your options are as a family member. And the problem is kind of figuring out where you want to go with that, but then the second thing is how do you actually do it? How do you actually follow through on these things? Detaching is really difficult because it means you got to live with a lot of uncertainty. You got to find a way to sleep at night even though you don't know what's going down. And you probably have to practice it quite a bit. You probably have to practice it. Any questions about what we do in reference to our loved one? What do we do in reference to ourselves? I just threw things up here. We're going to talk about this as we go through. This is all the self-care stuff. Positive psychology exercises, having a therapist, going to groups like this, stress management, prayer, meditation, all of the above, right? This falls into the category of what do we do for ourselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. All right, so let's get into this thing, okay? People were asking questions tonight about addiction. People were saying, which direction should we go? Abstinence-based, medication-based, whatever it might be. Here's what we want to get into. I'm going to give you some information about addiction tonight, but we got to understand something. There is no such thing as a garden variety addict. You'll hear people say, hey, it's just a garden. There is no such thing. It's not one size fits all. There's 1,000,001 different reasons why people become addicted, okay? There's a common thing that happens if a person crosses the line into addiction, and it's a brain change. But the problem is sometimes we don't know whether that person has crossed the line or not, and you don't have to actually be addicted to have really horrible things happen to you. Agreed? So what we do as a society is we sort of treat everyone like they're addicted because that's what you do in medicine. You treat the worst possible outcome. That's why we have to go get all these blood tests and MRIs and all these different tests so we can make sure we're okay. Does that make sense? So we kind of like anybody who comes into favor when they're here, we probably overemphasize the idea that people are addicted. We just kind of paint with a broad brush. But I've gotten to a point where I'm trying to be more straightforward with people, and I say things. There are certain times when I know for sure whether somebody is, but many times like that's not what this is about. It's about how can I help you figure out what you want to do with your life and move you forward. Who cares what you call it? I don't care what you call this. But what we do know is that there are kind of different ways, and one of the biggest ways, there are some folks, and this is probably the group that's most likely to be addicted in the classic sense, that simply they don't process dopamine the correct way. They never really did process dopamine the correct way. It was an issue before substances even entered the picture. Impulsivity, hyperactivity, inability to ever be satisfied. Always, if your child was ever like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? You know, plowing through a box of Fruity Pebbles. Bam! Right? Everything all out, all the time. Also, that risk-taking person, that impulsive kind of, let me go for it, no regard, bulletproof, that profile. And that's this thing called reward deficiency syndrome. Lower levels of dopamine are associated with this phenomenon. Also, at a higher level of likelihood, now I want to go on the record, is that anybody doing anything long enough can become addicted, right? But another higher risk level would be co-occurring mental health issues. So if I'm depressed and I'm kind of operating down here and I use cocaine to get out of bed, can you see how that's a bigger payoff than maybe the person who's not depressed? So this would be a risk. And then some folks would say it's all related to trauma. That addiction to anything is really an attempt to escape trauma. Because we can't stand the way we feel internally. Life is so uncomfortable, and the only thing that helps is I put this substance in my body and I'm able to check out. They would also say that's why people shop too much, gamble. They would say that's why there's internet pornography addiction. They would say that's why there's sex addiction in general. They'd say that's why some people are addicted to even positive things like exercise. Because what? They can't stand the way they feel due to unresolved trauma. And there's a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, written by Gabor Mate, that he just comes straight out and says it, like boom, it's all about trauma. I don't know if I buy that, but I do know trauma is present in a lot of cases.
And trauma is totally subjective.
Trauma in the sense...
I wouldn't say totally, but...
It's trauma if you say it's trauma.
Yeah.
Is how it works. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I feel like our son Austin, something that contributed to his feeling, maybe losing his self-esteem, was actually his first relationship.
So there can be...
I feel like on some level that was a traumatic experience for him.
Well, and that's exactly what Gabor Mate would say. That it's not trauma in terms of physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. It can be trauma related to bullying. It can be relationships. It could be... there's this thing called adverse childhood experiences. If you look that up, you'll see it. Adverse childhood experiences kind of go through a lot of that stuff, and the more of these you have, the more likely you are to become addicted. But the problem with that is that none of us escape without any of that.
Right.
So the deal is I feel like he's probably like, maybe you're pushing that a little bit too far. Because I haven't met the person yet who hasn't had some kind of subjectively traumatic experience. But we do know for sure, if you take trauma with the big T, life-threatening experiences, that absolutely that is connected. And again, we usually talk about this group right here, the red group, the addicted group. I'm going to try to talk a little bit more in diverse ways, more realistic ways. And what are the contributing factors? Age of first use, hands down, is the biggest thing. Average age of people in treatment centers is 14. You start using drugs and alcohol too early, your brain is simply not ready for it. That's a bigger predictor than genetics, but genetics is number 2. Environment, accessibility contributes. Length of using career, obviously the longer you're using, the more likely you are to become addicted. And then certain drugs are more addictive than other drugs. That's for sure. And then what works in recovery? There's recovery capital, supportive families. Do you have a job? Do you have access to meetings? All the logical stuff there. How old you are when you try recovery, that kind of thing. Age, and then obviously co-occurring disorders. This is the criteria, guys. I'm not going to go through all 11 of these, but these are basically 11 criteria that if a person has a pattern of 6 or more of these in any given 12-month period, they meet the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder severe. The word addiction never appears anywhere. There is no such thing as addiction in the medical literature. So it's opioid use disorder severe, alcohol use disorder severe, cannabis use disorder severe. And you go through these with the person and you identify it. And that's as close as you get to an x-ray in my world. Problem is, most people don't think that they actually meet that criteria. You're like, well, dude, interpersonal issues, you definitely meet that criteria. Everybody's angry at you. I met your mom and dad at group. Well, that's their problem, not mine. It's not that I'm doing anything wrong. They're just over the top, man. They need help. You ever have your loved one tell you that you need help?
No.
After they just stole your car? And they're appalled that you're like upset about it, right? That's a sign of the brain disease of addiction. Now, I want you to understand something. I can get away with saying all that because I am a person in long-term recovery and I've done all that stuff. So if you're out there and you're in recovery or you're looking for recovery, don't get jammed up at me. I'm one of y'all. And I know what it's like to look at my family and say the stupidest things in the history of the world. And to tell them that 2 + 2 = 18. And have my wife stand there while I explain to her how it equals 18. Because you want to know what? This is the first Monday of the month. And on the first Monday of the month, you add 14 to whatever you add to subtract to. And then you multiply it and you do the square root. And it equals 18. You need help. I know what it's like to do that. I know what it's like to look at a person who just saw me, literally just saw the behavior, saw the thing happen, look him in the eye and say, you didn't just see what you thought you saw. To the point where I made people that I love question their own sanity.
Is that like gaslighting?
It's gaslighting without question. But it's gaslighting on steroids because we believe it. Do you follow me? Gaslighting in the classic sense is I'm manipulating you and I know I'm manipulating you and it has a lot of political implications to it as well. Where addiction is concerned, it's gaslighting, but the person saying it believes it, which is actually the most troubling part of it. Because think about that for a minute. We are able to, because of the brain change, we're literally able to flip the script on reality. And that's why we're so convincing. And that's also why you will never win a debate with a person in active addiction. You will literally never win it. Yes?
So, like, they went through this thing where they said that they saw, you know, how in Greenville newspapers they all getting the clowns. And they claimed they really...
They saw what?
The clowns.
Oh.
There was a thing in Greenville
Yeah.
years ago. And I mean, they literally had me convinced that there was clowns living under the bridge. And then when I was out to my neighbor, he said, yeah, there was that whole thing, but the funny thing was no one in the...
So is your theory those were all addicts that were like seeing clowns collectively? What?
But no one in authority ever looked like a cop ever saw it.
I don't know. I've never seen a clown. I've seen clowns, but I've never seen a clown while high. I wouldn't want to see a clown while high. If you get me something to drink, I will pay you $1 million. Anything. Like if you get one of those out of the office in there, if you have them. So why does this happen? Mainly it's because we start putting substances in our body at way too early of an age, and we release this neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is the transmitter that allows us to feel pleasure. And it's naturally occurring. When you eat food, dopamine is released, so on and so forth. Dopamine is not the problem. The problem is with drugs, it releases an extraordinary amount of dopamine. This graphic gives you an indication. So this is like methamphetamine. Methamphetamine releases 1,200% more dopamine than normal activities like eating food. You guys follow that? So this is an extraordinary amount of dopamine, and any mood or mind-altering chemical does that. You guys get this? And this is where the problem lies, and this is where addiction starts to enter the picture, because this is not healthy. This is not how the human brain is set up to operate. Agreed? You're supposed to experience a little bit of pleasure. You're supposed to experience a little bit of dopamine, but you're not supposed to jam it with 1,300%. Okay? And so what happens is, let's just go through this. So let's pretend this is how it's supposed to be. You're walking around, you have 10 units of dopamine. All right? Don't worry about the numbers, but let's just pretend that's normal. This is a normal person experiencing a normal day. Beautiful day out today, Rich. Why, yes it is, George. What are you doing this weekend? Why, I'm going fishing, George. You know, I'm going to the Clemson game. Fantastic. Have a good one. Tell the wife I said hi. Yes, so do you. A good day. Good day. All right. Except if you're born and you don't have a regular level of dopamine. All right? And this gets back to the classic example that I was talking about earlier. The person who's, it's associated a lot with hyperactivity. It's associated a lot with impulsivity. It's associated with the personality type. If you ever have like a difficult kid who you feel like just is never happy and never satisfied, but not depressed. Depression is a different thing. Depression is what? You're in the bed, you can't go anywhere or do anything. This is just like discontent, okay? If that's you, while you're having that exchange with George, it's not working. Are you following me? It's just not, you're not feeling it. You're not feeling it. And so you're just not doing life the way everyone else is doing life. Well, then you're 14 and you're at the park and you're playing baseball and somebody has some alcohol and these older guys introduce you to alcohol and it's like boom. Now, not only do you go to like where everyone else is, you go beyond where everyone else is. And you're like, this is cool. Oh, this is color TV. You follow me? I can feel this now. And it isn't like you do that one time and the problem starts to unfold. This would be repetitive. But again, remember, the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to this because why? Your brain's not developed. You do it over and over and over again, and then what happens is because you're flooding the brain backs off the level and takes you from an 8 to a 6. So now you're in worse shape than you were before you began this whole journey. This making sense? But you know something you can do. You can get a hold of this stuff, and it'll make you feel better. So you do it again. And you do it again, and you do it again. And you're still getting by, and you're actually even above where you need to be. But once again, the brain compensates and backs you off to a 4. Okay? But you know where to go, so you do it again. But now, you're not even getting up to where you want to be. You're kind of like maybe feeling back to normal. But it's still too much at one time, so the brain backs you off again. Now you're not even getting back to where you were. This is the difference between heavy partying and addiction. Do you follow me? This is where the compulsive seeking of the substance comes in because you're out of your mind right here. I can remember, like, as soon as this stuff stopped working, you're just like, what the hell? What is this? I'm not even feeling it. Like, this is nearly panic for a person. And also understand, most of the time when we get there, we don't even know what we're going through. But you're still releasing too much, so the brain backs it off to nearly 0, and then you're not getting anything when you're getting high.
Is that when they go to a stronger drug?
They will be trying it the whole way through. And then this is what it looks like in terms of a PET scan. This is depletion of dopamine. This is regularly active dopamine. Yes?
What is Adderall?
Adderall is a mood or mind-altering chemical, so it would do, if a person was abusing it, would do all this. It'd be the same. Yep. Now, if a person is taking it as prescribed, that kind of thing, you can make an argument that wouldn't happen because maybe they wouldn't get this payoff, this 16 right here. How do you know whether a person's taking it as a prescribed? Well, you know, they're running out early. You know what I mean? Like, you would know. Like, when it says take 1 every 4 hours and they're taking 4 every 1 hour, that's not taking it appropriately. They're doing it for another reason other than the prescribed impact. You guys get that? One of the things that will go down with prescription drugs, people will get a hold of them and they'll say the doctor gave it to me. Well, the doctor didn't give it to you so you could take 30 in 2 days. And that's because they're trying for this. They're not trying for the actual therapeutic benefit of the substance. And that Adderall would do the same exact thing, and you would wind up right there. Because you're doing it, you guys get it? Because you're doing it for a different reason. You're doing it for a different effect. Somebody had their hand up back here. Yes, ma'am. Oh, when I say drugs, alcohol is a drug. So it's this alcohol. Okay, so yes, alcohol is a drug. Are we all clear? Like when I talk about drugs, I'm talking about alcohol. There is no difference. So the answer is yes. This is alcohol. This is Adderall. This is marijuana. This is opiate pain pills. This is benzodiazepine pain pills. This is if you're going and getting those little dusters and huffing them from Walmart. Anything that gets you high falls into that category. And alcohol definitely gets you high. This is what it looks like when it all says and done. Yes?
So does this recover? Does your dopamine?
Yeah, I'm about to
recover?
show you that.
Okay.
Yep. The good news is you come back online. Yes?
I know this is kind of off the drugs and alcohol thing, but when you look at, when they start really young and they're using video games, does that give them dope, get put off dopamine to them?
I don't.
I mean, I just wonder if it goes back to that.
I think it might, but I don't think it releases like 1,300%.
No.
I think it's
realize
actually
that.
video games are on here.
Yeah.
Video games are on here.
If they get,
Right there.
if they get that, I saw that, and I think that's why I asked that.
But it's just a little bit more than food.
But I mean, when you look at a teenager or
A
something.
little bit less than sex, a little bit more than food.
Well, that's what I'm saying, when you look at some of that, teenagers like the food, the sex,
Yeah.
and
No, and you know what? I think it's a good question, but I'll tell you, I'll go on the record and say no. Like, there's nothing that releases dopamine like psychoactive substances. And people say I got shopping addiction or I got online gambling addiction or whatever. I just don't buy it, guys. It's not like this. You're taking something, you're literally taking, think about it, a chemical, and you're putting it into your body that's just blasting your brain. And even if it's alcohol, it's the same thing. It's blasting your brain. It's not the same. I would argue it's not the same with video games. I'm not saying people can't have a problem with video games. I'm just saying it doesn't look like that.
I just wondered, starting at an early age, if they start with that, does it progress, I'm
Yeah.
just asking the question.
Yeah, no, I get it. You're right. But, so this is what it looks like. People say, okay, Rich, fine, it's a brain disease, you did, but you did it to yourself. You guys have heard this before. This is the best argument for you did it to yourself. Diabetes type 2, you give it to yourself. It's the pancreas, you put stuff in your body you shouldn't. Zingers, Twinkies, Pop-Tarts, all that stuff. And over time, you stop producing insulin and you have symptoms. Same thing with addiction. You see what I'm saying? It's a lifestyle disease, period. Now, and somebody said, what happens whenever we get into recovery? So here's the baseline. You do this, and then you add, and the red mark says DOW. DOW stands for days of wellness. So 30 days in, you gain a little bit. You get a little better. 60 days in, you follow me? As time goes by and the more you're doing, the better you start to feel. The problem is you still don't go back. You wind up where you were. And you have to figure out a way, if this was the issue, you have to figure out a way to deal with that. I have to figure out a way to deal with that now without going and drinking. Do you guys get that? It's not like I wind up above there just because I'm in recovery. I have to work on that. And people work on that in a wide variety of ways. This is where recovery programs come in. This is why we would recommend you're seeing a therapist and you're working on core issues. This is why we would recommend you're going to groups, because being around other people can help. But yes, you do get better. And here's the reverse. This is what it looks like. This is cocaine addiction, and you can see at 10 days it's not firing. At 100 days it's firing a little bit more. And if you followed that out for a year, you would see that got better and better and better and better as time goes.
What does LSD look like as a dopamine?
Yeah, so LSD is interesting. LSD is really hard to figure out. LSD doesn't necessarily fire on dopamine like what I just showed you. It seems to have like other types of damaging effects in different ways.
It seems to be my son's drug of choice.
Yeah.
He rationalizes that, so I'm interested.
It's and the problem with LSD is it tends to have negative impacts sort of outside of the addiction realm. And a lot of times you'll see people, they don't necessarily become classically addicted in terms of those criteria, but they suffer like a lot of mental health issues, a lot of behavioral issues, that kind of thing. What? No, that's Xanax. LSD, tabs, yep, and that kind of thing. So it would be hard to say it looks exactly like that, but I think the most honest thing would be it's impacting the person in another way. Just as bad, but in a different kind of way. You guys, LSD is literally a hallucinogenic, kind of like If you do too much of this, now you're risking more about co-occurring mental health, in my opinion.
It also can impact risky behavior. I mean, I was in a room where a guy threw out a piece of bubble gum. Another guy thought it was his finger, and he jumped out of a third-floor dorm window to go get it.
Yeah, so that's not good, right? It can absolutely. Well, drinking can do that too, right? Like there's you got to remember, you do not need to be addicted to have a bad outcome where substances are concerned. Some people would say that there are a lot of folks, like with this overdose epidemic, that there's a fair number of those people that really weren't addicted. Yet they took the wrong thing and the wrong thing happened. How about alcohol, for example? Alcohol kills more people than any other substance. I don't know if you know that or not. The chronic misuse of alcohol kills 88,000 people a year. But it doesn't look the same way. It's not as dramatic. Favor Greenville's not getting a call right now to go over to the hospital to respond to chronic alcohol misuse. It takes time. It's slow. I don't know if you've known anybody who's suffered health effects related to alcohol. Once it hits them, it's vicious. But it usually takes years. So we want to be careful that we're not... I'm talking to you about addiction because I want you to be very aware that if you're dealing with your loved one, you got to talk to them in ways that are very, very clear, very, very straightforward. Don't try to win a debate. Don't try to argue your way into behavior change because you're not dealing with a rational person. But I also don't want to minimize that there's all kinds of other bad stuff happening. Now, yes, ma'am.
With the dopamine, and you said some people don't have like the 10, they have maybe the 8 to start with. Is there any way you can determine what your starting dopamine is?
Allegedly, you can go to California, and there's a doctor that's doing that. It's not common. It's not common at all, and it's a little bit disputed. And you could make an argument that this could also be depression, too. Let's pretend it wasn't dopamine. This could be anything that puts you below the baseline and makes your experience in the world more difficult to enjoy than maybe other people. That's what I'm saying there. So it doesn't have to even be dopamine. It could also be depression. It could be anxiety. It could be anything that you get a higher payoff for. There's a thing called reward potential associated with drug use. And that goes like this, that there are some people, when they use, there's a bigger payoff than other people. People with less dopamine would fall into that. People with depression would fall into that. People with trauma would fall into that. You guys, yeah, and so if that's the case, that's what you're dealing with here. You can't tell. I think you probably could spend a bunch of money and go get like blood tests and stuff. You know, we don't. I've never really done that, and I don't know anyone who's done that. I know for sure that dopamine is an issue in my life. I know that that's me, and that I have to try to find ways to deal with that. But I'm in recovery. I don't use drugs. That's the stuff. And then I do a lot of therapy. I do a lot of other things. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure how to ask this, but is there any relation to like sports injury, head injuries, concussions?
It's a good question. In terms of risk for addiction, there really isn't. But it would look similar to this, though. If you saw somebody with a traumatic brain injury and you saw their scan, it would look similar. It really would. It's very. I used to have a slide that had a traumatic brain injury and somebody who crossed the line. It's very, very similar. But I don't think that there's an increased risk there. So, all right, so let's go back. And if we know that substance use is kind of, you're at higher risk if mental health is involved, then let's talk a little bit about how to handle that. Because the other question that comes up a lot is, I'm not sure whether this is addiction or anxiety. I'm not sure whether this is addiction or ADHD. I'm not sure whether this is addiction or depression. And I want to talk a little bit about some ideas or some thoughts around this. A co-occurring disorder is a substance use disorder and a mental health disorder. At the same time, at least one, many times people have multiple diagnoses. We're not big on diagnoses, but we do know that 33% of folks with alcohol use disorder also suffer from depression. We know that anxiety can be as high as 60%. So it's something that at least is there that we need to be aware of. And you as parents and loved ones, you probably ran into this. I mean, a lot of times that's the first thing that happens when you're dealing with your loved one. You're seeing all this bizarre behavior and you wind up sending them to a psychiatrist. That kind of thing. So you got to be aware of how these things mix and kind of what we recommend. And a lot of times, you have two different doors. And I've told this story before where you could just do an exercise where, you got a guy, I call it the Pittsburgh story, because I talk about the Steelers. All right, so I'm from Pittsburgh, by the way. I don't know if you knew that or not. So, all right, so you're at the game, you're doing your thing. This guy has a history of drinking a little too much. He has a history of using some other drugs, but he's never been to rehab. He's never been diagnosed with anything, but he does have that history. He also has had like a low-grade depression. If you talk to people, they would talk about being worried about him from time to time, but he's also never been diagnosed with any kind of depression. But these issues are there. He just hasn't gotten to that point in his life. Well, he's at the game. He's drinking all day. He's doing his thing. He kind of goes into the stadium. He comes back out. He gets in his car, drives home drunk, makes it home. And when he gets home, his wife meets him at the door, has the baby, and says, "I'm leaving. I told you. I can't deal with you." And she leaves, and the guy becomes suicidal. And he winds up calling his friend and threatening suicide. The police call. He gets taken to the mental health hospital. He enters the mental health ward. You like what I did there? Like that? He is now primarily diagnosed with a mental health issue. Because of what? The suicidal threats, and that's where he landed. Same guy makes it through the game, gets in his car, is driving home, but he gets pulled over and he gets a DUI. And he winds up going to jail. Which door does he wind up in? He winds up in the substance use door. Now, the reason why I say this is I want you to be aware of, with a lot of folks, it's as random as that, where their primary diagnosis comes from. It literally is just who happens to get a hold of them.
A recovery program in Atlanta right now, and so I'm thinking I'm a nurse, but I think he has more of a mental health issue, and I asked the inpatient rehab if they were going to deal with that and have a psychiatrist there, and they said, no, we're only going to deal with substance issues. Is that typical?
That is so typical and so inappropriate. It is absolutely inappropriate. I don't even know how you call yourself a professional program and say something like that. And so, but here's the problem. It is the majority of places would do that. So as family members, you almost have to become like de facto case managers.
Is that because there's more money in addiction?
No, it's because they've just never been taught anything different, and we're literally operating under a 1970s system. And places like Favor Greenville are few and far between, if you want the truth. Places that, because there's no way in the world they know. There's no way in the world they know for sure. And you know what? What can it hurt to get this additional evaluation?
Right.
It's inappropriate, but it is the reality of the situation. You guys get that? Like, that is, it's inappropriate, but it isn't unusual. Does that make sense?
Like that.
What's that?
You're not all like that.
No, I'm not saying every single one is like that.
So how does she deal with this situation?
Right. How do I have a psychiatric?
So he's going to be there. He's going to be there, and he's going to be stabilized around alcohol and drugs. He's going to have to get that when he comes out the back end.
Okay.
You guys get that? And also the other reason is that that's why rehabs exist. Rehabs exist because you behaviorally contain a person and you get them off the drugs. Does that make sense?
Right.
So he can still get that primary issue taken care of. Okay?
He was ready to get psychiatric help, and then that's awful anyway.
You would want to redo that when he comes home.
Okay.
The rehab can still do its job, which is what? Dry him out, give him a chance to get stable. Yes, sir.
Rich, now, with this situation, if I hear you right, she really needs to be the advocate here for that coming out the back end.
She almost has to kind of like find a psychiatrist. Yeah.
Okay, now, with the child, a lot of times the parent is about as far from them wanting to hear from them as possible. The child doesn't want to hear from the parent. So it's difficult for her, and also the medical people don't want to hear from the parent that much either.
No, it's not.
You're really caught behind
Right. And so, well, first of all, I want to say this. When I'm saying that it's inappropriate, I'm talking about if it's a licensed treatment center. There are also some places that are like faith-based programs that you can go, and they're not licensed treatment centers. They don't take insurance. I don't judge those programs. Those programs aren't going to address mental health. But if it's a licensed treatment center that takes money from Blue Cross Blue Shield or takes money from parents and stuff, they can't operate that way, but they do. And so we have to fill in the back end. You try to find a psychiatrist here in town. You try to, you see what happens when your son comes out, your daughter comes out, and they're doing their thing. Sometimes what you'll see is people won't say anything right away. Let's pretend that they buy into it themselves, and they're like, I'm just going to do meetings, and sometimes you leave well enough alone and you let it ride, but you monitor it. Does that make sense?
Well, he's gonna land on here.
Yeah. I mean, when he comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It's not this case, guys. It is just so inappropriate to say, like, this came first. This is what we do. This is, I don't know how people get away with that. I guess it's just, again, it's the way, it's probably stigma. It's probably the idea that, like, what the heck, he's just an addict or an alcoholic. Like, get your act together, dude. Yes?
I guess we were just lucky that she was diagnosed as bipolar before all of this. So.
Well, it can go the other way, too. I don't want to say it's just treatment. Sometimes the mental health world will kind of be, we're not going to deal with the alcohol stuff. So it can go both ways.
Yeah, they kept telling us at Greenville Mental Health that she was acting the way she was acting because she wasn't taking her meds.
And this is what you don't want it to wind up one or the other. Like, what you have here is it's a mental health problem producing the substance problem, which is what you're talking about, Carolyn. And then you have over here, it's the alcohol problem producing the mental health. You don't want to think of it that way. You want to try to think of it as, who cares what came first? How can we get the appropriate help for the person?
Yeah, we were lucky. She got into a treatment center that, they monitor her meds, but she's back on her meds.
Medication, yeah, a lot of times is one of the primary interventions. But I also want to tell you that, like many other times, understand there's a difference between mental health counseling and drug and alcohol counseling. So talk therapy is also part of this equation and part of this solution. You have, like,
in fairness, in rehab, because when you're on drugs, it's a difficult situation, I would think, to try to determine whether it's, mental illness or some stuff. And it's certain that if you get them off the drugs, then it's a clear picture, perhaps, to move forward.
I think that's the argument, yes. And I think there's probably some validity. If a person is acutely intoxicated or, like, has been smoking crack cocaine for 3 years, you're not going to get a clear, but it doesn't take long to get a clear picture. Like, in other words, you don't need 30 days. You need to get it out of their system and get them stabilized to a point where an actual working eval could get done. It wouldn't happen on day one, but it could happen before the person leaves in most cases.
Well, it's all wrapped up together, because you can get them clean and sober if the underlying issues are still there.
Which is a good point, because
they're going to revert, right?
Well, you get to this idea of, can you work through core issues anyway? So again, I get real, like, fired up when I start talking about this, but there's probably a more politically correct way to go about it, which is, look, it is what it is. They're dealing with what they're going to deal with, and that's a good thing, because people need to be stabilized, right? They need to get stabilized. They need 30 days drug-free. Cool. But we know that all of us do better if the whole package is getting addressed in anything, right? So let's take out mental health and let's just put physical health in it. Is it easier to get recovery if you're physically healthy? Should you also get your physical health checked out? You see where I'm coming from? So you can get into this thing where you're setting a person up for success if you're looking at all aspects of their life. Heck, you can make an argument that it's just as important to talk about vocational issues, right? Or social issues. Do you guys get where I'm coming from? Helping them get a job. And so the idea is, and here's the reality. This is where I'm telling you, like, the reality of the situation is, many times family members are left to do that. Because the system, now here at Favor Greenville, we want to help you out. But if the system in general is not set up to do that, right? The system in general is set up to do what? Diagnose a problem. Boom, here's what it is. We call it alcoholism. Now, take that problem and put it into a prescribed solution that is paid for, by an insurance company typically, and we call that rehab. Boom, get that done, and the other stuff really isn't our problem. And now, you could make that argument beyond just alcoholism. That could be anything, right?
Well, we're that way with specialists,
On the medical field, absolutely. So that's a better way to look at it, the way I just said. Yes?
So at the beginning you used 3 words. I think one was bio, one was social, and what was the third?
So the prevailing model of addiction, it's a biopsychosocial disease. It affects the mind, body, and spirit, mind, body, and social, whatever you want to think of. So it's not just the body.
Three have to be
Yes,
addressed.
ideally, yes.
Question.
Yes.
So in that between and betwixt world of mental and substance abuse world, I've heard some literature talk about you could throw smoking in there. It's an addiction.
Oh, yeah.
If you can't find a way to get off of nicotine, how are you going to find a way to get off an opiate?
Yeah, now, he just had to bring this up and get more controversial.
And there is a lot of controversy around it.
Big time controversy. The data, though, is clear that stopping smoking at the same time as stopping other substances increases success. The data is clear.
All addictions.
So the idea, but if you look at like culturally around this issue, everybody's smoking. So, but the data is clear, and a lot of treatment centers have gone to smoke-free environments. But it's, yeah, that's about as controversial as it gets right now.
If they're not smoking in rehab, they will when they get.
Yes.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
My son's been through many rehabs. Their answer was, they got enough on their plate, don't touch the nicotine.
Yeah.
The later version is, they're both addictive issues, and if you can't work on one, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
Because in both places, you're using a chemical to alter where you're at.
Yeah. Well, this is not even a gray area. This is black and white. The research has been done here. Success rates go up when people quit smoking at the same time as stopping other substances. But that doesn't mean that there isn't like one or two people that, I'm not saying that everyone should do that. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like I'm saying, this is just one of those areas where like actually we do know what's going on. It's been studied out the wazoo. And it's clear that if you quit smoking at the same time you quit other substances, you increase the likelihood of success. Success defined as what? In these studies, it was about abstinence-based recovery. It was about I'm not using anything. But that doesn't mean I'm sitting. I honestly don't talk to anybody about smoking. I just don't. There are two things that I don't say to people. One is quit smoking. The other is no relationships for a year. I have told people no relationships for a year for about the first 3 years of my career in my own recovery, and I never had anybody even come close to listening to me. I mean, I'm talking about like, they never even considered it. So I don't even say it now. And I don't talk about smoking either. Even though I know that to be the case, I just don't really talk about it. I tend to be dealing with people who are really kind of like in the mix, in the middle of some stuff, and they're not even sure what they want to do. Does that make sense? And so it's real hard to even go there and talk about smoking. I think the studies were when the person was kind of stabilized and in a facility. I could see how that would work, because think about it. I know for me in early recovery, one of the things was my physical health. I was like, yes, I didn't know what it was like to be without a hangover. I didn't know what it was like to be without, being dope sick. And so all of a sudden, like, I felt good. I wasn't a smoker, but I could see how that would have been a period of time for me to buy into it. Yes, sir.
My son finished a clinical rehab program last October, went halfway out, didn't allow smoking there. He relapsed and reached out for help, and he got him a couple weeks went to the state-based program, and he liked the fact that he was not going to be able to smoke while he was in there, because I guess he remembered that feeling when he was previously.
Yeah, and people will associate the two things with things. Like, remember, like a lot of times habits kind of go together, and so sometimes smoking will be associated with drinking or something like that. So you have to, our take at Favor Greenville is man, we're going to meet you where you're at regardless. I mean, we have people who haven't even quit all substances. Do you guys know that? We don't have a requirement when you walk through that door that you have to even know what you want to do, let alone with cigarettes. So for us, it's wide open. You know, I personally have operated that way for about 10 or 15 years, where I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, I'll have people who come see me who I take a harm reduction approach with. And they're doing less of a substance, or they're doing different substances, and they're staying alive, and they're starting to get their life together, and they're staying out of jail. And you know what happens over time? They start to make other decisions. Maybe another substance peels off. The problem that we have is we have this idea that, you know, recovery looks like total abstinence, and a person goes to 90 meetings in 90 days, gets a therapist, and lives happily ever after, because that's what we want, guys. That's what we want for everyone. And that's what but you need to understand is that is not how the world works. In any area. In any area of life. How do you all know, how many of you all have ever had like an experience where you knew the right thing to do, but you did the wrong thing anyway? Don't make eye contact. Right? You do it. You did it. You'll probably do it tomorrow. You know, we live in glass houses where we want to like judge people with addiction, and we want to say, why can't they just get their act together? Come on, get this right. Do this right. And, you know, the truth is you're not doing it right. I'm not doing it right. You get that? Like, it's okay to not be okay. The problem where substance use is concerned is twofold. Where addiction is concerned, what happens is, number one, is it's dangerous, right? So it's one thing to say Rich was on a diet, but he pounded a sleeve of Oreos. Which happened. You know what a sleeve of Oreos is? And I'm going to tell you, like, I can do that. I can freaking do that. There's nothing better than Oreos and milk, and I can do like a whole line. Carol! Come on. So you know, so that's the first thing. It's dangerous. The second thing is people in active addiction. I'm just going to say it. People in active addiction act like assholes. And they treat everybody bad. So that's the other part of the problem. Do you guys get this? It impacts you guys so dramatically that it's hard for you to say, oh, he just slipped up. So we understand that and we get that. But in your mind, be clear and understand that, like, if your loved one slipped up, it doesn't mean they're not going to get this. If they've slipped up 25 times, it still doesn't mean they're not going to get this. You understand? Like, there is no such thing as no hope. Yes?
Well, I appreciate you saying that because my son went through detox, rehab, had a relapse maybe about a month ago. He's probably tried to kill himself 2 or 3 times since by intentionally overdosing. So for me right now, I don't even care what it looks like 6 months from now. I'm just hoping he survives another 30 days.
Yeah.
Because maybe in another 30 days, he'll be in a different place.
That's right.
And something can spring from that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of one step at a time. So my concern now is that any long-term plan is just, is he going to make it till tomorrow?
Yes. Is he going to make it till tomorrow? And then also, what do you need to do for yourself in terms of, you were talking earlier about how much time do I spend with my loved one? And where do I go? And what do I, you know, maybe I need to be back from this situation because it is so heartbreaking right now. So you have that factor too, where you're like, what do you need to do for yourself in any given situation? We recommend things like being in these groups, and you start to formulate a plan, and you're kind of constantly reassessing the situation, asking yourself questions of like, how much do I want to be involved? How much do I not want to be involved? What are the boundaries that I can set? What can I do different? I mean, some of y'all might be living in a situation where you got some real straightforward different things you can do. Maybe they're living at your house and still using it, and you can talk about whether or not you need to set that boundary. Other folks, you're dealing with a situation where you have zero control. Maybe the person isn't even talking to you right now. You have to take this through your own individual situation and be saying, like, how do I, because it's not just what do we do with them, it's also how do you get through. And the idea would be if you have a plan or you have a framework or you have a way of making sense of that, you're going to do better with it. And again, that would be what? Your own program. Come to groups. If you need to get a therapist, maybe you try to get a therapist. If you need to get more involved in an exercise program, you do it now. Maybe you need to go back to church, get to this prayer group you were part of once. Maybe you need to get to a psychiatrist yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. When I went through what I went through with my daughter this summer, I went and saw a psychiatrist. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe, again, you get your own therapist. You start to figure out, you get this plan that you're going to follow, and you start to say to yourself, what can I control? I can control this plan. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And you try to have, you don't want to have pie in the sky hope. You don't want to be like everything's going to be okay. But you also don't want to give in to pessimism. Because understand, pessimism will what? Suck the life out of you. It's weird, man. It's really weird to sit up here and explain to you what it's like to be that person on the other side of that, and to be doing the things that I did to my mom whenever I was using, to be doing the things that I did to my wife when I was using, and stealing these pills and taking these pills and spending all this money and doing all this stuff and all the reckless behavior and putting my kids in danger and stuff, and being in the middle of it and not even really being consciously aware of what I was doing. I never once, ever thought about my mom and what I did to her during those situations. It wasn't like I was like consciously aware of that on any level. I was just going and doing what I needed to do in that moment, you know? And so that's the reality. If you have somebody in active addiction, that's the reality of their world. Yes, Carol?
One thing that I learned through all the horrible years was that I really could be happy even though my daughter was still on heroin.
Yeah, that's a key thing.
And it took me a good long while and a lot of support and help and treatment and therapy and all that to get there. But I was able to be happy.
Yeah.
And that's a hope I put out there for people because we don't know if they're going to make it or not.
Yeah.
So we have to learn how to get there.
Well, that's the key thing, because that would be the one thing that you could control. The only thing you could control 100% would be your reaction to the situation. And we are of the opinion that you can practice your reaction to that. That you can literally work on reconditioning your thinking to the point where no one's ever going to be happy about their loved one being in addiction, but you can get to the point where it's not impacting you. Maybe it was hitting you at a 10, and maybe it starts to only hit you at a 5, which is great improvement. So that's, how does that work? That literally takes being in groups like this. It takes reconditioning your thinking. It takes a whole lot of prayer, a whole lot of thought redirection. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know if you guys have ever been where you're like obsessed with something. You can't sleep at night. Well, you got to try to like bring yourself out of that momentum and try to think differently about it. One of the things that we're going to do, one of the issues that we're having here at Favor Greenville has a lot to do with you know, my availability and my impact on situations. So it's interesting. The organization has grown quite a bit. We have 5 or 6 different hospital emergency room projects actively engaged right now. We have 3 sites in 3 different counties. If you count in terms of anywhere we have at least one meeting, we have about 23 sites, okay? And I'm in a lot of different places at a lot of different times. And so I don't have the ability to maybe do a lot of the stuff I was doing early on. But what I do have the ability to do is to do trainings and to do groups like this. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to talk about going back to some of the workshop models that we did early on at Favor. And I think this probably predates everybody here. I don't know, Joni, you may have come to some of these. But these were typically 3-hour workshops on Saturday mornings that I would personally facilitate. And what we would do there is we would try to, it would be kind of open for anybody dealing with a situation where we could dig deeper into it. We needed a consultation and get into even like role play situations and rehearsals and stuff like that to try to help you guys have a couple more tools in the toolbox. Because we know the other thing about this, a lot of the stuff that we tell you to do is easier said than done. You know, I stand up here and say, like, set boundaries and stuff, but it's really hard. And it would be, if you practice it a little bit, could you feel more comfortable with it? You know, and then you go home and you break it off on your loved one. And you're like, oh, Rich Jones taught me this. Bring it on. Yeah, tell me I'm crazy now.
Amen.
Yes. So, all right, we're going to wrap it up for tonight because we're going to respect your time. Thank you for being here. I'm glad that my voice held up, and I'm glad to be back. We will be back here next. No, we won't be here Monday, guys, because it's Easter Monday and we are closed. So we'll be back here 2 weeks from tonight. I will remind you that if you're looking for additional information, please take these cards. This is manned by one of our recovery coaches. You can call there tonight if you have any additional questions. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up. If we get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease, and for the family members, brother, there's no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, good deal. Thank you. It is on my Facebook page.